It's time for Drummer Nation. Welcome to Drummer Nation, episode 20 already. This is your host, Michael Vosspine. This is part 2 in a 2-part series of a conversation I had with noted jazz drummer, author, and historian Daniel Glass. We spoke at the Jazz Education Network Conference in New Orleans in January of this year. In the interview, we'll learn about the Daniel Glass Jazz Intensive happening in June in New York City, a cool off-Broadway show Daniel's been involved in, and a couple of new books he has coming out. Up next on Drummer Nation.
Another thing that has grown out of the teaching that I do, the work with the drum history that I do, and understanding things and giving people the big picture about what actually is going on behind a drum set, which is what Freddie Gruber was very successful at. And I think when you start to see that, you go, oh, it isn't just about this on this limb and that on that limb. It's like, what are we actually doing here? How are we saying something with our drumming and moving people? Not only moving them to get them to dance or to get them to watch us, but to get them to open up their wallets. I mean, if you want to make a living as a drummer,
to come to the clubs, to come to the concerts.
I mean, as a drummer, if you want to make a living, how does your playing translate? What should you be thinking about? So, I mean, these are sort of big questions. And I've done a lot. I teach a lot on Skype. It's become an amazing thing for me. I've got students literally from 5 continents now, and I teach about 50 students a month.
Beautiful.
From all over the world. I got a guy in Eastern Kazakhstan. I got people in Australia, Japan, South America, Europe, all
That's
over
all
the US.
blowing up now, and it changes daily.
And it's amazing what you can do over Skype. People don't think you can get a lot accomplished. It's amazing what I get accomplished over Skype. And I have students that have been with me for 2 years we've never even met in person. I don't even know that I never even met them in person because it's like it's deep. It's a deep hang. Anyway, I do a lot of teaching on Skype, and I've done a lot of teaching in my life, and so I wanted to design a 4-day jazz intensive. Since I live in the center of the jazz universe, New York City, there's everybody always say, "Oh, well, New York's too expensive and it's too crazy." Let's do our jazz camp at Kentucky State University. So you're studying jazz in the middle of Kentucky, in a rural environment on a college campus. Well, that's nice. You could provide a dorm and a cafeteria and have
no
people
slight
come
on
in.
those guys, but it's not.
It's not in the middle of the greatest jazz city in the world. There's an element to that. So what we do, 4 days and nights, we're going from 10 in the morning until midnight every day. Tons of instruction. Every day we've got, I do a historical PowerPoint, presentation at the beginning of every day for each era. So we've got traditional jazz, swing, bebop, and also the blues, because the blues, you got to talk about the blues.
Blues is everything.
And
what time of year you do this?
It's coming up June. This is our 2nd year. We're already halfway to being sold out. June, I think the dates this year are the 2nd through the 5th, and we're doing it at the Drummers Collective.
DanielGlass.com will have that?
Yes, go to DanielGlass.com.
So it's at the Drummers
and look
Collective?
under clinics and intensives, the clinics intensives tab.
Cool.
It'll be at the Drummers Collective, so you're in the middle of a music school, practice facilities, all the practice stuff we need is there.
But you're still in New York.
But we're still in New York, so every night after we're done, we go out and we go to different spots. I do a concert with my trio one night. We run around the city. There's a club called Fat Cat where I do a 1920s gig. And then you've got all the great jazz clubs after we're done. Sometimes we end at 8 or something. So, then people can go out and do what they want. And then I've got great guest stars, guest artists coming in. So far this year we've got Billy Ward coming in, which I'm really excited about. A couple other surprises. Got to go to the website. On the website, by the way, if you want to learn more about this, there's a really fantastic 5-minute video that shows you last year's. We also provide a Metro card for people so they can take the subway and buses for free.
That's a great idea.
It's like a week-long Metro card. We cater in some of the meals, not all of them, but it is an intensive. You know me, and you know that I'm an intense human being, and but
you know any great drummers who aren't intense?
Yeah, I mean, we dig into it in a heavy way, and last year was an amazing experience. We also had a jam session night one night where all the students got to sit in. We brought like a little house rhythm section out at this spot in New York, and people sat in. You know, so you're in the middle of it. Oh, and then we do field trips. So
where do you go?
Steve Maxwell's, and now D.W. Gretsch opened a showroom one floor above.
Above Maxwell?
Above Maxwell.
Steve's been a guest on this show. He's a good friend.
So, and Steve's great, and his shop, it is, Michael, it's truly one of the great drum shops, if not the, maybe that and Pro Drum in LA and
well, you got
Memphis
Jim
Drum
Pettit
Shop.
in there,
Yeah, I mean, there's great drum shops, and then these places are like the Cadillac. So if you imagine like a Fifth Avenue high-end boutique for drums, that's what Steve Maxwell's is. Beautiful presentation. The walls. You got the wood paneling on the walls.
Great inventory of classic
There's a museum
gear.
area. You could see the Joe Morello kit and the Elvin Jones kit and the Louis Bellson kit. Stuff on the walls everywhere. There's a whole room with vintage cymbals.
You want to go somewhere and hang about passionate stuff.
Yeah.
Just go hang there, man.
Yeah.
Any of these great drum
So
shops.
we take everybody on a field trip. We start off, you get a personal tour from Garrison, the DW artist relations guy. The showroom they have up there, it's artists only, so the public can't get in unless you're hanging with me at the Jazz Intensive. And then we go down and we hang at Maxwell's for a while, So it's fun, and then the whole thing ends on a Monday, and everybody comes down to Birdland after we end. There's a big student concert, videotaped, so you get to take home a videotape of your work. I have a house rhythm section. That was one of the biggest things. Top level New York cats, and for 3 out of the 4 days every participant works with the rhythm section, and we do feedback sessions, so you can it's me and the rhythm section. They're great guys, they're into the feedback too. Everybody gets up,
I'm coming, man.
And you can hang and watch everybody else's feedback, which is almost as important as your own feedback.
Exactly.
You learn a lot from getting feedback and watching other people do it. And we work on core things. It's so easy to say, do you want to learn how to swing? But this is what separates the men from the boys and the women from the girls, man. This is a jazz intensive. What makes a great jazz drummer is the ability to swing, and anybody that's tried it, you can go dink, dink, to ding. That doesn't, you can go boop, ba, ba, ooh, against dink, dink, to ding. That doesn't mean you're swinging.
It's not a pattern.
No,
it's not a
pattern.
riff. It's not a motif.
The ability to play
a feeling.
Yes, the ability to play John Riley's Beyond Bob drumming book, back to forth.
Great book.
You may be able to do that. It doesn't mean you can swing at all. And you may sit down with quarter notes on a ride, and you might swing your ass off. And that ability is what is going to get you hired. It's what's going to help you make a living in the world as a jazz musician. And so we pull it all together: the historical stuff, the pulse, swinging. And I try to really knock people from a completely different perspective so that they go, man, okay, now I really understand what it's all about. Plus, you're surrounded by that city. The energy, the intensity. You go to the clubs. You see what's happening. You really understand. As we were talking about just a little while ago, jazz is not Eastern Kentucky State. It's not something where people gather. I mean, it is nowadays. There's that aspect to it. But jazz was jazz musicians in the 1930s and 40s and 20s were one step above criminals, and they were seen as sort of it was underground. It was cutting edge. It was dirty. The edges were not pretty. It was not done in symphony halls.
Whenever you heard jazz music in a film score from back then, it was always a negative scene. It was always a swarthy.
Or there was a drug addict involved. And so it's important that people who are wanting to play jazz come be in that environment, because maybe other than New Orleans, New York City is the only place where you can really sort of connect to the actual roots of the...
I was going to bring that circle that you just made, that we're at the Jazz Educator shindig, and it's in New Orleans.
And it's in New Orleans.
And it seems to
but
be
the
a
weird
good
thing
spot,
is,
man.
we're doing it in a Sheraton... Or is that what
Hyatt.
Oh, Hyatt. We're in a Hyatt Regency hotel.
Well, that's for the logistics.
But New Orleans is right over there,
Yeah.
and we're bringing all the New Orleans people in.
They're all coming in, and we're all going out after hours and hearing the guys.
And that's
and the
important.
Food,
it's
the whole
important to
thing is immersive.
experience jazz in its native habitat, which is not a concert hall or a lily white university setting somewhere. And no offense to anybody of any race or anything like that. It's just jazz is a gritty it's like punk rock. I think of jazz and punk rock as the same way, and because it started as a rebellious thing, or underground death metal, or hip hop in the 1970s when it was in the Bronx, these were not pretty mainstream kind of things. And you need to put that when you play this music. It needs to have this dirtiness and grit to it,
The word jazz.
Exactly.
You can look that one up, guys.
Exactly. Just like the word rock and roll. Look that one up. Mm-hmm. These terms were they were not terms that self-respecting people used, every day. And you can intellectually understand that, but you gotta be in it, man. So that's what we try to offer in this jazz intensive, is to try to, get people to feel that gritty connection to the music and understand why this drive. If that ain't there, you gotta have that. It's gotta be. It could be as refined as you want, but it's still gotta beat people up. So anyway, that's really exciting. June 2nd through 5th, New York City. Go to my website. All the information is there. We still have some early bird, a few early bird slots that are available.
So you got the intensive. You're gigging in New York. You're teaching on Skype. Your books are always coming out.
I got 2 new books. Hopefully both will come out this year if I can just find the time. I just did an off-Broadway show, too, in New York that was very cool.
You were telling me about that.
Yeah.
Politically cool, too.
I got to play a jazz musician, and I got to be on stage, and I got to improvise every night. That's as doing a Broadway show. That doesn't happen very often. So it was very hip. It was wasn't one of the huge Broadway theaters, but it's definitely a very cool off Broadway kind of a complex. They have 3 theaters in there, and in fact, talking about all this grittiness of jazz, the show is about a character, a historical figure who was a real person named Lord Buckley, who was a white guy, but he immersed himself in the jazz community. In the 1940s, when bebop was coming up and jazz really was tumultuous as far as what bebop represented and what it was emerging from, and how there was a clash of generations, a clash of races. It was a revolution. Mm-hmm. It was a revolution, and he was right in the middle of that as a white guy, and he created a character called Lord Buckley. He was a common guy from California. He wasn't, but he created this royal persona for himself and called everyone lords and ladies, and affected this sort of he wore a tuxedo with tails. He had a wax mustache, kind of this crazy look, but he was very erudite, but he used the language of the hip, which was the language that jazz cats talked, and it was a black thing for sure, but he took that and he brought it kind of into the mainstream. So he was even earlier than the Beats in the 1950s, like Allen Ginsberg,
the Beat Writers,
and on the road, Jack Kerouac, Lenny Bruce, the comedian. All of them were influenced by Buckley, let alone Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, Frank Zappa. So if you were in the know, if you really are in the know, you're hip to him and what he did. And he made these records where he would take Shakespeare and do it in the language of the hip. So instead of saying, what's the beginning of the "Lend Me Your Ears" part?
Friends, Romans,
Countrymen. He would say, hipsters, flipsters, and finger-poppin' daddies, knock me your lobes. Right? So instead of Friends, Romans, and Countrymen.
Right.
So that's, but that's how he would talk. And so this show I did, there's a guy from California who's taken on what Lord Buckley would be if he was alive in 2017. Mm-hmm. And he does some of Lord Buckley's original routines, because Lord Buckley you could say they were comedy records, but they were more like monologue, kind of like Lenny Bruce, more storytelling stuff. Mm-hmm. And he would take the Christmas Carol and do that in hip. He would take the Pied Piper and do that in hip. And then the jazz trio on stage with him is interacting with him. There's cues and hits, and then we break into song and do some stuff. And
all that shit that was hip then is still hip.
It is still hip. It's very hip.
It's still hip, man.
And audiences loved it, man.
Uh-huh.
They totally dug it. It's kind of like Shakespeare, because it's so deep, the language. You don't get everything, but you understand what's going on.
It wasn't
you have to kind of give in.
Trying to be hip.
Yeah,
it was deep.
It really was a language, you know, and it was an attitude, you know, it was a feeling. So I'm doing that, and I don't know if we need to. We
got a couple of minutes. I know you need to run.
I have two exciting book projects that I'm working on right now. One is a rock and pop drumming manual, you could say. I'm doing it with a professor at Berkeley named Henrique de Almeida, wonderful Brazilian drummer. He's been at Berkeley now for about 6 or 8 years, and he.
I think I met him when I was up there.
Yeah, amazing drummer, but he's been a fan of mine, and now I'm a fan of his. So we have a mutual admiration society. But he wants to do. He teaches a course in rock and pop drumming, an introduction, and so he brought me in. Number one, because I'm a writer. Number two, because English is not his first language. And number three, because he was using one of my books, but it wasn't quite right for his class because I didn't write it for his class. So we're essentially writing a how-to for rock and pop drumming, but we're breaking it down in very interesting ways.
What's it going to be called?
I don't even know yet what it's going to be called. I'm not even sure. But it'll have rock and pop drumming in the title. But we're approaching it in a way that nobody really ever has, and we're offering for every sort of piece that we offer about rock and pop, there will be overview and historical background, and you know that's my thing.
Well, you'll have to come back and talk about that. What's the other book?
Well, the other book is a research book, and it's sort of my next research project after the Century Project, and it's about what are called photographic postcards, and it's hard to explain, but I'll explain in 2 minutes or less. So between 1900 and 1930, around the turn of the century, two very important things coincided. Number one, postcards, we all know what they are, were deregulated, meaning that prior to that time, postcards existed, but you could only buy them from the U.S. government. So the only designs you could get were what the U.S. government put on the postcards. Then they said, okay, as long as you meet certain specifications, anybody can make a postcard. So now, anybody could put anything on a postcard. Number two, photography, by the turn of the century, was becoming cheap enough that anybody could participate. And so you could take your own pictures, or you could go into a studio and have your picture taken. It wasn't something that was so rare and expensive that not every person could do it. So now the masses, guess what they decide? Let's put photos onto postcards. It seems kind of like a ridiculous idea by our standards today, but between 1900 and 1930, this was like Facebook. This was the most popular way to communicate. Everybody could suddenly have a photograph taken of themselves, or they could take a photo of something. So, and what's cool is because there were stores that dealt in postcards, and people wouldn't even send the postcard. They would put 5 postcards in an envelope and send that, And these are real photographs, which means all the interesting subtleties of a real photo, as opposed to, say, a dot matrix print thing. You get all that. Well, guess what? Musicians, and in particular drummers, were making these postcards, or there were pictures of bands with drummers in them. And the reason we go to 1930, the book traces these photographic postcards, and they were really hot from 1900 to 1930. By 1930, silent movies now are it. So suddenly, you could go see a film and watch somebody do something, and you didn't need a postcard anymore. But prior to 1930, these postcards capture the life of a drummer.
Isn't that interesting?
And what a drummer's job was. And
so you're finding these?
Well, they had so many of them that it's a very collectible thing nowadays. So there are thousands and thousands of these postcards out there. And a student of mine named Kelly Ray Tubbs, who you're going to be learning about, she's a great drummer and amazing researcher. She's done the real heavy lifting on this stuff, but she had a small collection of these. And I looked at them and I said, this is a book waiting to happen. So what we're going to do is do like a coffee table type book. Each 2-page spread will have the postcard. We've got about 80 to 100 postcards. They're all of drummers and drumming and different situations. Everything from marching to community bands to all female orchestras to child stars. I'm trying to get with Kathy Rich to see if she has any, because probably there was a Traps the Drum Wonder.
I bet there was.
Postcard made. There's postcards of musicians promoting themselves. So they've got, Joe Blow, Traps and Bells,
Right.
It's unbelievable what we were finding. And what we're finding is all kinds of things that no one ever realized about drums. Just a couple things real quick. One is the proliferation of female drummers that existed at that time.
Really?
You never would have known it. Professional female drummers.
That's happening a lot more now.
Yes, it's happening a lot more now. And I just wrote a 4-part series for Drum about the history of female drummers. And I thought that only now, is really... But what you realize is that female drummers have always been around. It's just that we didn't look at them at all or talk about them at all.
Good for shining some light on that.
And because my partner in the project is a female drummer who, as a band leader for many years, has really struggled and been a female drummer that, with discrimination that most us men can't even imagine,
Right.
It's really interesting to write the book with a woman drummer.
You've been enjoying Drummer Nation, episode 20, The Jazz Intensive, with my guest, Daniel Glass. If you want to find a place where drummers talk about drums, this is it. We post a new podcast every 2 weeks. This is your host, Michael Vosbine, and I want to thank our friends at Atlanta Pro Percussion, Danette Classic Drums, Sabian Cymbals, and Classic Drummer Magazine. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.